Hi everyone, Rusty Nelson here with another tutorial on drawing. If I see students struggling with any skill while learning how to draw, perspective is typically one of the first that they have to tackle. Not only is mark making important, but being able to put an object into a scene, into a space with the proper perspective is going to be fundamental and key to a successful drawing. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to establish when drawing with one point perspective is a horizon line or an eye line. And it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. It just needs to give you a reference point. And your vanishing point, where depending upon where you're standing as the viewer, is where everything converges on that horizon line. So I've established a vanishing point right there. And again, this is 1 point perspective. All right, we're going to work with a basic shape. Let's just say a square. All right, so we'll draw a square right here. This square here, let me draw a little bigger. This square sits on the horizon line. Okay, I'll draw another one that's higher than the horizon. Okay, just simple squares. They don't have to be perfect. I'm going to draw one below the horizon line at a different distance away from the horizon line. And I'm going to draw this one on the opposite side, but straddling the horizon line. All right, right there. All right, so these squares, and these are essentially faces, faces, right? So we're going to figure out how to make cubes using 1 point on this horizon line. So I'm going to start with, let's just start with the simplest one. Because this one is sitting on the horizon line, and so is this one. This is straddling the horizon line. You're only going to see 2 planes of a cube using a 1 point perspective. And I'm just going to drag that in, and we just need to draw a parallel to this line to establish the thickness of the cube. And because this cube is sitting on the horizon line, this edge right here is just horizontal because it's direct over to the vanishing point. All right, so there is our first cube using 1 point perspective, constructing it from a square, a 2D square. All right, this one here is straddling the horizon line, so we'll draw that real light guide pointing directly to the vanishing point, and we just need to establish the thickness of that cube. And now we have, if you notice, this one is straight on the bottom, but now that we're below the horizon line, this portion of the face is below, so it angles the opposite direction. So you got everything's converging. Think of these as triangles, right there, that little space there. Those are just triangles pointing to the vanishing point. Now, because this square is above the vanishing point, we're going to be seeing the underneath side of the cube that we're going to draw. So I'm just going to draw a quick little guide, and right like that. So there's my angles from the corners. They're all pointing to this one vanishing point. And this line is parallel to this line, and then this line is going to be parallel to this line. And then you got to just pop in the correct angle using those light, quick, sketchy guides that I just drew. All right, and then you can just kind of shade it in. All right. So we have 3 planes here, front plane, side, and bottom. Do the same thing here. It's just going to be, you're going to see the top plane of that cube. All right, establish the thickness or the length of the cube, and then run those lines parallel. They don't tip. These lines don't tip. They're straight or horizontal. Okay, and now we have a cube sitting below the horizon line so that you could see the top of the cube. All right, so there we go. We have taken a square, a two-dimensional square, working with a vanishing point, and created cubes, and depending upon where they sit in relationship to the horizon line, you're going to be able to see various planes of that cube. Now this also works with, let's just say we're going to lay one plane down, a square. We want that square to be laying on the surface. All right, so let me draw a line. All right, and I'm going to draw a guide out from the vanishing point to this line. Okay, it's just a simple line, and I want to establish that there's a square laying on the floor, on the ground. All right, so I'm going to draw another parallel line, and using these diagonal lines coming from the vanishing point, I'm going to establish the extra edges and lines. So right there, so we now have a square laying flat on the surface, but it's being and interacting with the vanishing point. And that's kind of handy because sometimes you need to know and be able to put a circle in perspective, laying a circle that looks, a circle is a nice round. Now I'm doing a real quick one, right? It's not perfect. So it's a circle, but you're going to want to lay it and draw that circle in perspective, and you use a square in perspective to get there. So I'm going to draw that line again here, and we'll get the edges here kind of working out. Okay, so just pull that out. All right, so now we have a new square in perspective, and all you got to do to get that circle to read right is just kind of come in and draw that ellipse to where the peak of the circle touches the edges of that square that's in perspective, and you'll get the proper ellipse for being in perspective. Now that's kind of handy and necessary for understanding when and how to draw a cylinder, whether the cylinder is in perspective or the top and bottom of the cylinder is in perspective. So for instance, you'll want let's say we have a ellipse on the top, right? And that's essentially, just imagine that box is in that shape right there, right? It's all pointing over here, and then you have, let's see, there's the horizon line. You've got a similar ellipse below the horizon line, and we're drawing a cylinder. All right, now there it is. So we're going to work with this bottom arc because the bottom of the cylinder goes below the horizon line, so you're going to see the bottom, only the bottom edge arcing that direction. And because this cylinder, part of the cylinder, is above the horizon line, you're only going to see that top edge. You won't see the top or the bottom of the cylinder, just the arc of the roundness of that cylinder there. Here, let me clean that up a little bit, and there we go. And I'll put a little value on it to shade it. All right, so there, and then we'll throw a little value on it. All right, so there we go. So you only see this arc, and it arcs, the arc points down because you're below the horizon line, and on this one the arc of the ellipse points up because you're above the horizon. Now if you were directly sitting on the horizon with a cylinder, the bottom edge of the cylinder would be just simply a line. And we'll come up here. Let me try to get an ellipse going. All right, so we'll come up here like that, and we'll draw the arc, the top arc of the cylinder. But because it's sitting right on the eye line, it is not going to have any arc on the bottom of that. The bottom part of that cylinder. All right, so there's that. Or just the opposite, if it's below, you'd only see the bottom part arc. The bottom part only has the arc. The top would be just a line, horizontal. Oh, let's see here. What else? If the cylinder was above, if everything was above the horizon line, the big trick is getting those ellipses to match. All right, so we are above the horizon line, and we're going to see the underneath side of the cylinder. So now you actually have to kind of draw and get the entire ellipse on the underneath side of the cylinder, and we'll erase the back side. I'll just redraw that. There we go, like that. All right. So using perspective to get the right depth for squares and circles and cubes and cylinders, it's all very relevant to that one point in the to do this, you just reverse it for below. So that is essentially a quick primer and how to work with 1-point perspective. That dot can be anywhere on the horizon line, and your squares and circles and objects can be anywhere. It just, they have to interact with each other once you start drawing. Okay, that was my tutorial on 1-point perspective. Practice drawing 1-point perspective until it makes sense, until you feel comfortable and you're able to put a cube or a circle or a square into a scene in the correct perspective, and we will then be ready to move on to 2-point perspective. And if I notice my students having any difficulties with perspective, it normally starts happening with 2-point perspective. Practice 1-point, get comfortable with it, so that hopefully when we move into 2-point, it won't seem quite as foreign. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. And if you did, please give me a like. And if you're looking forward to more of my tutorials, give me a subscribe and you'll be alerted every time I drop a video once a week. I will see you in our next video on 2-point perspective.